My name's Rohanit, and I'll be talking about landmarks in Panama.
My name's Renuka, and I'll be talking about landmarks in Canada.
My name's Meera, and I'll be talking about landmarks in India.
Okay, awesome.
And if you pull up the Chrome, and then you can either keep it there if you want to keep seeing yourself, or you can go to present mode, which is hiding right there.
I think it's right behind the little box.
Oh, right here.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, awesome. So first, we're going to start off with a warm-up activity. We're going to go through and show you guys some landmarks, and just raise your hand if you guys have ever recognized any of these landmarks. So these are two from India. Can you guys raise your hand if you've ever seen these before?
Or tell them to type it in the chat, yes or no.
Or you can put it in the chat and just say yes or no.
See some hands in one class. A lot of hands.
Okay, that's awesome.
And a yes in the chat.
Sounds good. Okay.
Taj Mahal.
There we go.
That's a good guess. Yeah, that's correct for one of them. So what about these ones? Does anyone recognize these? And again, you can either raise your hand or answer in the chat. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. What about these? Does anyone recognize either of these?
Not as many hands. One person said, my student's grandma stayed in a castle in Canada, and then someone else guessed Russia. So someone recognized Canada.
Oh, that was close, yeah. And what about these ones?
A couple of hands.
Yeah.
That's many.
Okay, so just to give you guys a quick perspective of where all of our landmarks are, they are situated in Canada, which is the big black star on the left, the top left, and then Panama right below it, Poland to the right, and then India in the bottom right corner. So we're first going to start off with landmarks from Canada, and just so you guys know, I decided to present on Canada because I'm actually from there, and I'm going to be talking about a landmark that's actually in my home city. So just to give you guys an idea of where the landmarks are in Canada, they're all where those black stars are. So they're kind of more towards the eastern part of Canada in Toronto, Quebec, and then where I'm from called Halifax. So if you guys look really hard, you can see on this fun little map around the same area, you can actually see the CN Tower, which we're going to be talking about, the Chateau Frontenac, and then also Citadel Hill. So the first landmark that we're going to be talking about is from my home city in Halifax, and it's called Citadel Hill. For some of you who might have recognized this landmark, you might also know it by its other name, which is Fort George. And it was originally named this after King George III of England. So going off of that, it was founded in 1749 by the British when they founded the city of Halifax, and it was originally used as a military base, which was really good because it looked out into the harbor and could see any ships that were coming in and that could be a threat to them. And so they continued to build it all the way up until 1856. So each one of those pointy stars that you can see make up one fort. And so totally it kind of gives this unique star look to it from above. So the fort was very important to the British because close by, the French also had a really important fort in a town called Louisbourg. And so the British used this to defend the city of Halifax. Today, it's more used as a symbolic site. And so it's still guarded, but it's not really used to defend the city anymore. And there's a clock tower that you can see there at the right. And every time it strikes noon, the cannons over there that you can see on the left will actually go off. And that still happens today, every single day. So the next monument is the Chateau Frontenac, which I think some of you guessed it's kind of like a big castle in Canada. And it's located in Quebec City, which is in the province of Quebec. So it was built in 1893, and it was originally built so that it could be a hotel, but one that was very luxurious. And it was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway Company when they were trying to build a series of really fancy hotels so that they could get even more tourists. The building itself is named after the governor of New France, or Quebec, Louis de Beaume, who is also known as the Count of Frontenac. So the hotel itself is very elevated, and it is actually the historical site of many important events throughout history. So actually during World War II, many important leaders of the Allies came to meet in this hotel to discuss war strategies and important things related to the war at the time. But now, as you can see in the upright corner, it's probably one of the most fancy hotels in Canada. So the final monument that I'm going to be talking about is the CN Tower in Toronto. And so this is probably the most new landmark of all the three. It opened in 1976 and is probably the most recognizable building in Canada. A lot of people think that the building was actually built just as a tourist attraction, but it was actually built to improve telecommunications, which means that it helped with radio and phone signals. So at the time that it was built, Toronto, the city, was just starting to boom and improve, and they were building a lot of skyscrapers. And with all those tall buildings, the radio signals of the city really started to get affected. So they built this really tall tower where all the signals would come from to help improve all of that communication. So at the time that it was built, and up until 2009, it was actually the tallest freestanding building in the world. And it was so tall, in fact, that they had to use a helicopter to put the pieces together. I don't know if you can see, but in the top right corner, that's a picture of them trying to put the final pieces on it. And so today it's still used for telecommunications, but there are other tourist attractions that you can do while you're visiting Toronto. So you can go out onto the Sky Bridge, and it's basically a floor that's completely glass. So you can go out and look down and see all the way down to the ground. You can also have dinner up in the top of the tower, or if you're really adventurous, you can go bungee diving. But I've never done that before.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Renuka. So now I'm going to be talking about Panama and just some major landmarks there. And the reason I chose to talk about Panama is because I actually had the opportunity to visit Panama and work in some of the other areas in a medical clinic. And I found that during my time there, I really enjoyed immersing myself in the culture, the language, and a lot of what the nation really had to offer. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about some of the landmarks that you can find here in Panama and how they relate to the history of the nation. So this is just an overall map of the country of Panama. It's found in Central America, and the border on the right, if you can see all the way on the right, actually borders Colombia, and that's the beginning of South America. So Panama is located in this really interesting sweet spot between the two Americas. And so as you can see in the middle of the country, you see three little black stars, and those are where the three landmarks that I'm going to be talking about are actually located. And as you can tell, the three stars are very close together, and they're found mainly within the main part of Panama City and the central portions of the actual country. But as we can see here in this picture, I just wanted to show that even though the three landmarks that I'm going to be talking about are located all within the middle part of the country, Panama is actually a very diverse nation. It's actually made up of 10 different provinces that are all characterized by different kinds of people, different kinds of religions and heritages. And so I actually had the opportunity to work in the Darien province, which is that brown region all the way to the right, the one that is the closest to Colombia on the right. And it was there that I was able to work more with indigenous populations, or more people, tribal kind of people who had been living within this area for really like hundreds of years, far before Panama was even an independent country. But as you can tell with this map, with the different provinces and the different types of people, Panama definitely does have a lot to offer. So it's really great to keep in mind. So now moving on to the landmarks that I'll be discussing today. The first one, and possibly the most notable and the most recognizable landmark in Panama, is actually the Panama Canal. And so the Panama Canal was built between 1903 and 1914. And the reason that it was built was because when ships were involved in trading, goods and different kinds of products, it was very difficult for countries to be able to ship their products from Europe and Asia into America, because there was no real way to connect to the western parts of the Americas. And so there was a lot of talk for a major part of history, especially within the 1800s, of potentially building a canal within the Panama region to allow for entrance for boats and ships and really make trade a lot easier. And so that had been in the works for quite a while, but because of a lot of political reasons and because a lot of people weren't treated the way that they thought they would be within Panama itself, the canal wasn't really built until much later in 1903, and that was when Theodore Roosevelt actually struck an agreement with the Panamanian government. And what's really interesting about the Panama Canal is that it was built right after Panama really got its independence. At the time, there were some Colombian forces that were trying to really take over Panama and try to assert their control over the country. But when Theodore Roosevelt at the time as the president sent in American troops to help the Panamanian people that were living there, they were able to strike up a deal that cost $10 million in order to begin building the Panama Canal. And so at the time, it was really notable because it was a mark of growing international relations, because at the time, America didn't really have many alliances within Central or South America or anywhere within the Latin American landscape. So it was a big deal at the time. But unfortunately now, more in the future, around the 1960s, 1970s, there have been some growing tensions because there is kind of the notion that America does kind of control this part of the Panama country landscape. And so that has been a little problematic, but overall it's really been helpful in terms of trade and allowing for ships to pass through. And so as you can see in these images here, the Panama Canal is very frequently utilized ship route in which many different ships go through in terms of trading and transporting goods all across the country. And on top of that, as you can see in the top left over there, there are actually a lot of cruise ships as well that actually pass through the Panama Canal. So it really is a very bustling and very busy place, and it's really helped shape the manner of global interconnectedness that we see today. And so for the next landmark that I wanted to talk about, I'll be discussing the Iglesia del Carmen. So this is actually a really special church that you can find within Panama City. And it was officially inaugurated in 1953. So it's still relatively new compared to some of the other churches that you can see in Latin America. But it is located within the heart of Panama City, and as a result of that, because it is one of the biggest and most iconic churches within the capital of Panama, it's heavily visited by many tourists and many practicing people who practice the faith as well, who live within Panama itself. And the church is actually dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and so it does hold a very special place within the city of Panama City. And what's really iconic about it is that it is one of the really truly Gothic pieces of architecture in all of Panama. And so it's really emblematic in that it really displays some of the more Spanish roots that were found in medieval times as this area of Panama was growing within its history. And so these are just some of the pictures of the Iglesia del Carmen. As you can see on the bigger picture on the right, inside the actual building itself, it has giant arches and beautiful paintings and sculptures. So it really is a church that a lot of people do recommend visiting just because it's really nice to look at from the inside. from the outside as well. As you can see at the bottom left in that picture, it does have, it is quite big, and it's also very iconic in the way the two pillars kind of come out of it. And that's why it's one of the biggest tourist attractions and landmarks in Panama. And then the last landmark in Panama that I wanted to talk about is the Palacio Bolivar. And so the Palacio Bolivar actually means the Palace of Bolivar. And so this really is just like a giant palace and building pretty much that you can find within the outskirts of Panama City. And it's located within a place called the Plaza Bolivar in Panama City. And as of right now, this building holds a lot of tours for tourists to be able to go inside and really look at it. And it also has the special purpose of housing the Ministry of Foreign Relations. So it is also a very important political building that you can find within Panama. Initially, though, the Palacio Bolivar does actually have a very interesting history because the palace was actually meant to house a grand nation named La Gran Colombia back in the 19th century that was meant to be led by Simón Bolívar. Back in the 19th century, Simón Bolívar was a major military figure within Latin America who helped rid Spanish inquisitions within Latin America and he really helped give independence to a lot of the countries such as Colombia, Venezuela, and Panama as well. And back at that time when he helped to get this independence, he wanted to make a giant Latin American, South American, basically mega country in which multiple countries would come together and form this massive kind of centralized South American hub. And so that was his plan. And so because of that, he chose Panama because it was smack dab in the middle between the vast majority of Latin America and in the middle of South America. And he wanted to call it La Gran Colombia or the Great Colombia. But unfortunately, unfortunately for Simón Bolívar, because of a lot of the issues that came with being able to do that, he wasn't able to successfully undertake that. But to this day, interestingly enough, there is actually an ancient Panamanian chapter of the Bolivarian Society that Simón Bolívar started back in the 19th century that still meets annually here once a year. And so I think that's really cool that a tradition that started way back about 200 years ago is still intact to this very day. And so these are just some of the pictures of the Palacio Bolivar. As you can see at the top left, like I said before, it does house the Ministry of Foreign Relations. So you can see lots of different flags representing different nations and different kinds of ethnicities and whatnot. And on the inside as well, as you can see the picture on the right, it is a very big palace that was meant to house a lot of the political figures, the major political figures at the time. So it really is really regal and it's beautiful on the inside as well. So it's definitely a major landmark.
Musical chairs.
Yeah. So everyone can see us a little better. Okay. And I'll be talking about Poland now. I'll be talking about Poland because I am actually 100% Polish and most of my family still lives there. So growing up, I would spend almost 5 weeks every summer visiting my family and traveling around the country. And I'm really excited to share some of my favorite places with you. So as you can see on this map, Poland is right in the middle of Europe. And I'll be talking about landmarks in Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, and then also 2 landmarks near Krakow, which is a really big city in the south of Poland. And here you can see more of an interactive map of the country, and you see that Poland is covered in a lot of forests and rivers, and it has a lot of medieval castles and forts. There's a lot of really, really long history. It dates back more than 1,000 years ago. And it's bordered by Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Russia. And so the first site I'll be talking about is the Old Town in Warsaw. And Warsaw, like I said before, is Poland's capital. And the Old Town is right in the middle of Warsaw. And this was the first part of the city. It was built in the 12th and 13th century. So that was the 1100s and the 1200s, a really, really long time ago. And it's surrounded by fortification walls to protect the city from any type of attack. And on the right side, you could see the royal castle, and that marks the entrance to the market square, which is the actual center of the city. And it has restaurants, bars, street vendors, street art, It's just very bustling with activity. There's always people there. It's a lot of fun to spend time there. And it also has a bunch of museums. So there's the Literature Museum, which is dedicated to Poland's greatest writer and poet. His name is Adam Mickiewicz. And then there's also a historical museum of Warsaw, which has a lot of exhibits from World War II because Poland was very involved in the war. And from the 1944 Warsaw Uprising, which was the underground resistance movement that was led by the Polish army, trying to liberate Warsaw from German occupation at the time. And then the column at the middle that you see in the picture is dedicated to King Zygmunt III, and he was the king that moved the capital from Krakow, which is where it originally was, into Warsaw. So this column just commemorates what he did. And so, unfortunately, during World War II, this city was completely destroyed. It was the biggest city in Poland. There were 1.3 million people lived there, and 85% of the city was completely torn down and brought to the ground. And so we lost a lot of the historical monuments that were there. And so it had to be entirely rebuilt. And in the top right corner, you can see a picture of what it used to look like. And then the other pictures show you what it looks like now. So it's very similar, and they did a really great job of completely reconstructing it. And so you could see that there's cobblestone Gothic streets and alleyways, different Baroque palaces like the one you saw in the slide before, churches, and tiered houses. And then now we're going to move to the south of Poland, to Krakow, which was the first capital of Poland before it moved to Warsaw. And here is Wawel Castle, which is the first residence of the kings and queens of Poland back in the 11th century. So this was the year 1000, almost more than 1,000 years ago now. But the castle wasn't fully completed until 1540 because there was a lot of renovations. There were some fires that happened along the way. So what you see of the castle now was built in 1540, which is super old. And so Krakow, unlike Warsaw, survived World War II, and it wasn't affected as badly. So all the buildings are original. They didn't have to be rebuilt. And so Poland's kings and queens lived in this castle up until the 1600s, which is when the capital was moved. And during that time, the castle became the seat of Poland's lower court, which is kind of like Congress in the US. And the royalty only went back to the castle for special occasions. If there was a wedding or a funeral or some kind of important parade or coronation. And now, if you are to visit the castle, it's a museum, and it has a bunch of artwork and important historical artifacts from the long history of Poland, dating back from the 1300s until today. And you can see in these pictures that the castle is built on a hill, and under the hill is a big cave, and this is called the Dragon's Den. And there's a legend that's associated with this cave that says that a dragon used to live in the cave and terrorize the people of Krakow. He would eat all their cattle, their sheep, he would eat people, and nobody could destroy this dragon. Nobody could kill him. So eventually, the townspeople devised a plan where they stuffed a fake sheep filled with sulfur and put it in front of the cave. And of course, the dragon ate it because he loves eating sheep and got so thirsty, he went to the river and drank all the water out of the river and exploded. And that's how they defeated the dragon. So now when you go visit the castle, you can go see the cave where the dragon used to live. And there's this statue of the dragon out in front. And if you're really lucky, you could see him breathe fire because he breathes fire every once in a while. Then the last place I'll talk about is right near Krakow. It's about an hour away, and it's the Wieliczka salt mines. So these are massive salt mines that were built in the 13th century, and the salt that is there was formed 14 million years ago. So it's been there for a very long time, and they've been mining it from the 13th century up until 2007. Is when they actually stopped mining it, so pretty recently, and now it's just a tourist attraction. Also, as you see in the picture on the right, there's a giant hall, and they hold different types of events there, like concerts, theater productions, balls, weddings. And the really cool thing about this place is that everything is made of salt. So every little sculpture and engraving that you see, even the chandeliers, the staircase, everything is made out of salt. And so this salt mine is 1,072 feet underground and 178 miles long. So if you look at the picture on the left here, that's what it looks like from the top. So it's just this pretty small building. And underneath that is a massive, massive mine that's 178 miles long and over 1,000 feet deep. And so you could see that there's also a lake that far underground, and the lake is very salty, almost as salty as the Dead Sea. So about as salty as it gets. If you went into there, you would definitely float. And here is the last picture, and it has a lot of chapels and engravings that were made by famous artists. And if you go on the tour, you're actually encouraged to lick the wall because, as I said before, everything is made of salt. So everything is pretty much edible. Yep, and that's it. Thanks for listening to my favorite places in Poland.
All right. Hey, guys. So I'm going to be talking about India. So I'm going to be talking about it because my family is from India. Let's see. So this is just like to give you guys location of where it is. There's China. India is known as like I'm blanking. Okay, sorry. Okay, here's a fun little map of different places in India. So you'll see the Taj Mahal, which probably most people know. The Golden Temple, which I'm also going to be talking about, is also on this map. So the first one is going to be the Taj Mahal. So similar to the US, India is made up of states. So the Taj Mahal is located in Agra, which if you look on the map, it's located in the state that's pink, north near the top, and it was built in 1631. So it was built during the Mughal Empire, and Shah Jahan had 3 different wives, but Mumtaz Mahal was his absolute favorite. She died giving birth to his 14th child, and he decided that he loved her so much that he was going to build her this entirely white marble mausoleum for her. So this entire structure is built just for her. It took about 2 decades to build, and it kept up for the majority of the Mughal Empire, but once their reign ended, and it started to deteriorate a little bit until the British colonized India. And then once the British colonized India, they decided to rebuild it and started to take care of it a lot more. So here's just another picture. You might recognize them. So nowadays it is a very large tourist attraction. It was a 2007 Natural Wonder of the World. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site from 1983. There have been a few problems with pollution. Since it is entirely white marble, it will get dirty very quickly. So the Supreme Court of India has actually put in anti-pollution acts to keep away factories and heavily smoked areas from the Taj Mahal to keep it pristine and keep it white. So the next one that I'm going to be talking about is the Golden Temple, and it's located in Punjab, India, which is actually where some of my family's from. So it was built in 1570 to the 1580s, and it's pretty much exactly what the name is. It is made from 750 kilograms of pure 24-karat gold. So just a little bit of the history of the Golden Temple. The findings of it are credited to a couple different people, but it was a very collaborative effort. So Sikhism is one of the most popular religions in India, and they wanted to build this Golden Temple so that all the Sikhs could find a common place to worship, and they wanted it to be very grand and very popular, and they wanted a lot of people to come. So that's why there were a lot of people involved in the making of it. So that's eventually how they carried it out. It took quite a while to build, but these are just 2 of the names of people credited with helping come up with the idea and the execution of the plan. So also in these pictures, you'll see everyone wearing head coverings. You won't see like people wearing shoes generally, because whenever you go into a temple, this is like common in Sikhism, Hinduism, and like a lot of different places in India, but it's kind of just a sign of like respect to like keep your head covered, take off shoes. Like if your feet are dirty, you should wash them. Whether you're Sikh or not, nowadays a lot of people come to visit and see the temple. As you saw in like the previous picture, some don't go inside, some choose to pray from the outside, but this is a very popular site in India. And then the next one is the River Ganges. So it's about 2,500 kilometers long, and it will stretch from the Himalayan mountains, which is in the northern part of India, to the Bay of Bengal, which is more in the southern part. So it stretches a long distance throughout India. A little bit just on the history is that the river is known as the embodiment of the goddess Ganga, and the Mahabharata, which is a old Indian epic. If you're familiar with like the Odyssey, that's like a Greek epic, it's similar concept. So there's a lot of variations about the mythology behind how the river was created, but it said that there was, one of the variations is that there was a really large war, and then a lot of this king's soldiers died, and he called upon to Lord Rama to bring down Ganga to like wash away the dead bodies so that all the souls could go to heaven, essentially. But she is very, very powerful, and they knew that it would basically flood all of India if she came down. So then they called upon Lord Shiva, and he had like massive hair, and he trapped her in his hair when they brought her down so that he could control the flow of water, which eventually became the river. So nowadays, it's a very sacred river. When people die, it's common in India for them to cremate their ashes because they believe that the soul is more powerful than the body and that the soul is really what matters. So people will put their cremated ashes into the river. A lot of times on very popular holidays, there can be millions of people in one day that will come to the river just to bathe in it, because it's believed to wash away karma and sins for those that come to visit. So in this picture, there's only a few people, but if you look up other pictures online, you will see like dozens and like hundreds of people just like crowded around one area. So we're gonna play a little game. So we're just gonna show you guys a picture, and then you guys can guess what landmark it is that we went over. If you just want to have your teacher type it into the chat box. So what's this first one?
And you can just put A, B, or C.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one should be easy. You just think about it.
Okay, you guys are correct. It is B. So what about this next one?
A.
That's also correct.
A. I think she meant B, B, B. Yeah. Nice. Great job.
Good job, guys.
A, A. Yep.
Good job.
Yeah, that's correct.
B. B. Yep.
All right, good job, guys.
Yeah. So that is Citadel Hill, for those of you who guessed.
Yep. A.
Yeah. So you guys learned a lot today.
So if you guys have any questions that you guys want to ask, you could have your teacher type it into the chat box and we can answer that. It can be anything about the landmarks or just like some general questions that you guys might have.
I can exit.
So, I don't know how tall is CN Tower.
Okay. No, I do have it. I just have to quickly check my notes. The CN Tower is 1,815 feet tall. So really tall.
Is that the tallest building in Canada?
It is the tallest building in Canada.
And do you know how long the Golden Temple took to build by chance?
I don't remember the exact number, but it took a few decades. And then there was a period where they stopped construction, but then they went back to building it again. So it was probably a lot longer.
If you guys have any general questions about the countries we talked about, we can answer those too.
Maybe while they're typing, you guys can talk a little bit about like some things that you've done when you've been there, your favorite things about the countries, favorite foods, or just a little bit about the culture. Each one just say a little bit.
Yeah, I can start. So I lived in Canada my whole life before I moved to North Carolina. And so Halifax, where Citadel Hill is on the very east coast. And because it's a very old town and it's on the east coast, it's kind of known as being the fishing and shipping port of all of Canada. So there's really good seafood, and the province or the state that it's in is called Nova Scotia, which is Latin for New Scotland. And that's actually because there was a lot of Scottish that came over. And so we have a lot of Scottish heritage. If you go down to the waterfront, which is on the main part of the city, you'll always hear bagpipes playing at some point in time. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the mix of Scottish culture with other types of settlers who came to Nova Scotia, like the British or the French, or there's also a lot of Irish people as well.
Right, so for India, I would have to say my favorite part of India is the entertainment industry. So I'm actually making my culture kit about like Bollywood and like movies and film and dance and stuff. So like my family, my dad's from Gujarat, which is like the western part of India, and my mom's from Punjab, which is in the northern part of India. So definitely music-wise, like my mom, she likes listening to like a lot of Bhangra music. My dad, he likes more like traditional type music, and it's definitely influenced me a lot in college. I'm on an Indian dance team here at UNC, which got influenced like from my dad, and I just like watching like Bollywood movies and things like that. So I think that's my favorite part of India.
My favorite part of Poland. I guess I just have a lot of really great memories from spending my childhood summers there, and most of my family is from either Warsaw or from the village area about like 2 hours outside of Warsaw. So my grandparents live on a village, so does my aunt, and they have a lot of animals and a lot of land, and it was always fun to just adventure around. You would swim in the river in their backyard.
It's always family over, always having different sorts of family gatherings and eating way too much food. And food is mostly a lot of meat and potatoes. We love the really hearty meals. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. We'd go pick flowers from wheat fields or catch frogs like out in the out by the river. It's just a lot of nature and greenery, I guess. And then the city is also a lot of fun because you see all the historic monuments and the really old buildings. And Poland has a really rich history, so it's really exciting to learn about all of that.
I think for me in Panama, I really enjoyed being able to learn from the people I was able to work with in the clinic that I was at. But for me, the most memorable part I remember, so I went on a clinic, like a brigade trip with 20 other UNC students. And I remember there was a girl who came in with her mom who was a patient, and the girl had her pet sloth with her. It was literally like a baby sloth. And I remember when like she brought it in, like everyone was like freaking out, like, oh my God, a baby sloth. Because like here in America, we don't have that. You don't find that, you know, North Carolina, anywhere here actually. And they couldn't understand why we were freaking out so much. Like, it's just a sloth. And we were like, it's a sloth. Like, but apparently they showed us like a little bit down the road, there was this giant tree there. And then underneath the trees, there were just tons of sloths and baby sloths just like crawling around really slow. I just remember, I think for me, that was like the most memorable part of being in Panama, just, you know, sloths, you know, they were adorable, and the people were amazing too, so it was a great time.
All right, they're wondering why they built the Golden Temple?
So they wanted a central place of worship. So they wanted one very large, elaborate temple that all the Sikhs could go to worship. So it is still a temple nowadays, but a lot of non-Sikhs still go just to visit and just see the attraction.
And are there stones on the outside of the Taj Mahal? Do you know much about like the exterior?
I am not sure about
I
that.
can check on that one. Do any of the landmarks you saw remind you of landmarks in the United States or any of the places you've been to? Anything that was similar?
I would say no, just because in Poland, the buildings and the landmarks are so old. And the United States is a very young country. Like, we've only existed for about, less than 300 years. And so a building that was built 1,000 years ago versus something that was built a few hundred years ago is going to look very different. So yeah, I can't think of anything that's similar really in America.
The CN Tower actually reminds me a lot of the tower in Seattle. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but I remember like when I was younger in movies and stuff, I would see the tower in Seattle, and I was sure that was in Toronto. And then someone later explained to me that they look very similar, but they're actually different.
How many times a year do people bathe in the River Ganges? Or
God,
variety?
a lot. It's a very religious river, and there are many holidays. Like, I could probably list off a holiday for like every other day of the year for India. And for those like religious purposes, a lot of people will go to the river to bathe in it. And then a lot of people they also believe in the river's like healing properties. So some people would take like a vial of like the water with them to go. So if like a family member is like ever really sick or something, they believe that if they drink it, then it will help heal them. So sometimes they take it back with them too.
And they asked how deep is the Panama Canal, and I saw 40 to 45 feet.
So the Panama Canal is about 40 to 45 feet deep. So.
And around when did India become independent from the Great British?
1947.
They became
independent in 1947, so not too long ago.
They like to hear about foods. If you guys have a favorite food in each country, you might want to mention.
Well, in the area where the Chateau Frontenac is, the most famous type of food that maybe some of you guys have heard of is poutine, which is really simple. It's just French fries, gravy, and then like melted cheese on top, and it's really really good. But it's originally French Canadian, so half of Canada is French, and then the other half is English. And so where that big hotel castle is, it's all French speakers there. So you get a lot of French cuisine there.
I think my favorite Indian food is my favorite dessert is gulab jamun, which is kind of like a pancake rolled up into like a ball, and it's bathed in this really sweet syrup, so it's very similar to like a pancake.
My favorite Polish food is definitely pierogi, which is like the Polish version of a dumpling, and they have different fillings, but usually it's potatoes and cheese. You can also have mushrooms or cabbage or meat, and there's also dessert ones, which are really yummy. And the dessert ones usually have fruit inside, so like strawberries or blueberries, and you put cream on top. And then with the savory ones, with like the potato ones or the cabbage ones, you usually fry up some onions and some bacon to eat with it, and it's delicious. It's so good.
That's good.
I think for me, what really stood out to me in terms of food in Panama was like just like how good the fruit there was. Like the pineapples and the cantaloupes, they were just like, those were my favorite foods when I was there, just because they were so fresh and they just tasted better than like what we get here. Because when we're here, we're like, oh, fruits. Like, fruits, so I think that's just stood out to me the most.
When did you move from Canada?
I moved from Canada in 2014 to go to college in UNC. So just 3 years ago.
And is the Golden Temple solid gold or covered in gold? You gave up the sentence.
I'm not entirely sure about how the actual structural components of the building itself, but I'm assuming it's covered in gold.
And why is the Chateau Frontenac shaped like a castle?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I'm just going to assume because when it was built, castles oftentimes equaled luxury, and so the company was trying to imitate luxury to the highest standard, and so the best way they knew how was to make it look like a castle, because that for everyone was the epitome or what it meant to be or stay somewhere fancy.
And I want to know about your experiences going to college for the first time. So what was it like leaving high school and starting college? Maybe what was hard or what you liked or what was different.
Okay, I guess I can start. So I'm from New Jersey, and I came to college in North Carolina, so it was very different for me. Things move a little slower down here. People are a little nicer. So it was a big adjustment, but I really love it, and it was fun to be able to live on your own for the first time and not go home to your parents. You just feel very independent, and you have to learn a lot because you're on your own, and school's a lot more difficult. It's a different structure. You have to be more responsible, but you also meet a lot of really great people here, and it's an exciting 4 years. I don't want it to end.
I think what was one of the coolest parts was how many different things you could get involved in. So I remember in high school, there might have been 4 or 5 things that I was interested in. Here, there was, hundreds, but you can't join all of them, obviously. But there's such a diverse group of people here, and you'll meet friends all over the place. You'll meet them in your classes, where you stay in your dorms, or what types of clubs you join. So it's a really great way to meet people and learn more about others.
Yeah, I think from my experience, going from high school to college, I went to like a boarding school, so I was kind of used to living by myself, but it was very different going to school with like 30,000 people here. I feel like I'm constantly seeing someone new, so definitely the diversity aspect. There's definitely something for everyone since there's 30,000 people. Like everyone has different interests, and there's always something that you can find that interests you in a group of people too that like share similar interests with you.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think that coming to a place where it's just so many more people than you may be used to at first can be challenging, because like it's hard to like find your own space and find your own group. But I think that's like also like the great part about UNC too, just because it is such a big school that you can meet so many different kinds of people and really invest yourself in so many different kinds of experiences. So I think that's my favorite part about UNC.
Okay. I think that's it. So you guys can check if there's any last questions, and if not, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, if you guys have any last minute questions, feel free to shoot us them. But thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for watching. And we hope you get to visit all of our places at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we got one more. How easy is it to learn other languages while visiting other countries? And if you guys want to say like one word from another language, maybe to tell them. And then what was your experience of learning more than one language, if you know more?
I think when you're in another country, it is a lot easier to learn the language, in my experience at least, just because when you actually immerse yourself and you're speaking to other people who are native speakers in that new language, it really does bump up, your ability to speak in that language. For me, Spanish, I'm a Spanish minor here at UNC, but speaking it, in a classroom setting is very different than actually speaking it with the real native Spanish speaker in Panama. And so I think that's what, it does make it easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm also a Spanish minor, and Polish was actually my first language, so I'm working on my third one now. And I studied abroad in Spain last semester, and I've been learning Spanish for a really long time, but I think studying in a different country and living there makes a huge difference in learning the language, just because you're in a situation where you're forced to speak it. There's often people who don't speak any English, and so you have to be able to communicate in their language. And just being in that kind of situation helps you learn a lot quicker and a lot easier. Maybe uncomfortable at first, but you'll be surprised after you leave how much you've learned and how much you've picked up there. And also another thing with Spanish is with every country you go to, they speak a different type of Spanish. They have different words, they have different dialects or different accents. And so it's good to travel to those countries to understand the differences and know when you're talking to people from different countries that they might not understand what you're saying if you're speaking a Spanish version of Spanish, or if you're speaking like a Chilean version of Spanish. So yeah, definitely living in just visiting the country is super important in learning the language.
And definitely to add on to that, once you learn one language, it is a lot easier to learn other languages and to understand other languages. Like I took Spanish from kindergarten all the way to high school, and then my first semester at college here. And I remember I'd never learned French, but I went to France and everyone spoke French there. I didn't understand much, but I had taken Spanish, and French was similar because they're both Romance languages, and that definitely helped me understand a lot more there, even though I'd never taken French.
Yeah, I'm from the English part of Canada, so I don't fluently speak French. However, because we're a bilingual country, everyone is required to learn French at some point in time. And it was definitely easier to actually speak French when I would go and visit the parts of Canada that were French speaking, because you actually get to practice and use it, which is a lot easier than when you're just in the classroom.
All right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, guys.